Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my weekly wrap-up of May 3rd, 2015. I hope you guys have had a good week and your weekend is treating you well or has treated you well, because by the time this goes up tonight, your weekend will probably be over. Unfortunately, that's the way things are going to go today. I've had a good weekend. I decided on Saturday morning that instead of doing things like booktube and reading, I was going to pull everything out of all of my closets from underneath my bed, from my pantry, and just get rid of things. I have never done this before since I moved out of my parents' house, and I've gotten rid of a lot of stuff I've been carting around for a while, and the feeling is good. I gotta say that. I felt a bit guilty about not being on booktube and not reading a bunch of stuff, but it needs to be done. So I'm going to have to take a break and deal with being an adult and having a house and all that. So what I have read this past week, I basically tried to start too many books at the same time and then kind of just stopped reading some of them. I took some books back to the library that I'd had for the entire month of April and never opened. Never opened them. I didn't read a single word of Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood. I didn't read anything of The Magician King by Lev Grossman. I took back a darker shade of magic by V.E. Schwab because the first 50 pages utterly bored me. So I feel like I've failed at reading a lot of things this past week. I've just ditched a bunch of things and moved on to others, and that also happens, but my brain's been kind of on the fritz. So what I have read this past week, I buckled down and I finished Cryptonomicon by Neal Stephenson. This is a 900-page book about multiple storylines starting out in World War II up until the present day in the 1990s, and ultimately becomes about a treasure hunt for World War II war gold, basically. And I've already filmed a reactionary review to this, which I'll go up on Tuesday probably, so I'm not going to talk about this very much. This is my least favorite Neal Stephenson book so far. I think I even liked The Diamond Age more than Cryptonomicon. I really liked Lawrence Waterhouse's storyline. He's a mathematical genius and a cryptographer during World War II. He's also kind of socially inept. But his storyline had a lot of the cryptography and math that I really liked. He ends up at Bletchley Park, and that was really cool. So I read most of the book for just a single storyline. Like, a quarter of the book was interesting to me. So I'll talk more about what I ultimately didn't like very much about this book in my review on Tuesday. It was a perfectly good book that just didn't work for me on multiple levels. Oh well. The other book that I finished that I've already filmed a review for is Mindfulness is Better Than Chocolate by David Michie. This is a nonfiction book about practicing or starting to practice mindfulness and meditation in your life. It's a really good book, actually. I really am glad that I read it. And like I said, I already filmed a review that will talk more about what Michie is talking about and what I felt about it. So yeah, I mean, there's not much more to say about it than it's about how to practice mindfulness and meditation and the benefits of doing so. The next book that I finished was an audiobook, Undeniable by Bill Nye. A lot of people, when I say Bill Nye, they're on Twitter, they're like, hey, Bill Nye the Science Guy. I don't actually know Nye as the science guy. I never watched any of his TV show. I'm actually a bit too young for that, I think, and I didn't have TV for a long time growing up, so it wasn't like I was watching reruns of Bill Nye the Science Guy. Okay, let's backtrack for a minute here. Bill Nye had a widely publicized and pretty controversial debate with a creationist. I can't remember his name. His name is escaping me. Back at the end of 2014. I haven't seen this debate, but I definitely heard that it was going to happen. And Undeniable is Bill Nye explaining his side of that debate in book format. So I don't think you actually have to watch the original debate if you don't want to. Nye is basically repeating what he said in the debate and then expanding upon certain points. So Undeniable covers what evolution actually is and rebuts a lot of creationist arguments against evolution. So basically, Bill Nye is asserting in this book that creationism is illogical, irrational, and hypocritical in that it a lot of creationists believe that evolution is wrong, even while accepting other things that are because of evolution. And I'm not explaining that very well, but Nye goes into a lot of detail about how you can see the effects of evolution in all aspects of life and how you can see that evolution is actually happening now. Like the bit about the mosquitoes in the London Underground, I had never heard about that before. That was actually very interesting. I'm probably not the target audience for this book because I have never doubted that evolution is a real thing. I don't have any religious beliefs that come into conflict with science, honestly. I just don't. But I was really interested in listening to this book because I was interested in that clash between evolution and creationism, and you know the proponents of those two systems of belief. I don't know if you call it that. And it is kind of scary if you accept what Bill Nye is saying about creationism, that it's detrimental to critical thinking skills, that it's detrimental to scientific advancement that benefits society. That is kind of scary. I mean, I think Nye says early on in the book that he is greatly concerned about creationism because he himself is an educator and he sees creationism as a roadblock to educating people. And yeah, I do kind of agree with him on that, though I've never actually run across a diehard creationist before. Overall, the book was really interesting. I'm really glad I listened to it. I didn't really think I learned anything more about evolution. Like I said, I've never doubted evolution is, you know, how we got here, and I've learned about it multiple times in school. He does throw in some tidbits, like the mosquito bit that I'd never heard of, but overall, it was interesting. I think this is not a book that's going to convince creationists. It's going to be a book that affirms people's belief that evolution is true and that might sway people who are on the fence. But that's the one thing that I didn't care so much about this book, which I think was kind of the flaw, is that Nye is trying to break down a religious belief, faith, by using logic and science and rationality. These two things don't mix very well. I'm pretty sure that if somebody is such a firm believer in creationism that they will come onto television with you and debate you publicly, that they're not going to be convinced by logical arguments. They're probably so immune to logic and science that it's not even going to work. So that's why I don't think this is necessarily a book that creationists are ever going to read and be convinced by, but if you're on the fence or you're just curious about counter arguments to creationism, then this is the book for you. The final book that I finished was The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This is his debut novel and one of my most anticipated books of 2015. And I have to say that I had really, really high expectations for this book, and it didn't really live up to them. The story is about an archipelago called Dara that has 7 warring states on it. The king of one of the states of Zana conquers the other 6 to create an empire. And as so often happens in real history, the conqueror emperor's empire begins to fall apart as soon as he dies. There is a rebellion or multiple rebellions led against the imperial forces by people like Matazindu and Kunigaru, and the entire book, all 600 and some odd pages, is this endless stream of battles and fights. It reads like a history book. I actually ended up enjoying the way that the story was told. I think that the storytelling is similar to some of the Chinese stories that I have read. It's more high level, and it doesn't really go into a lot of organic character development, but you get a lot of history and the broad sweep of the story packed into one book. What I didn't really care so much for in this book is that I wasn't really rooting for any of the characters. They do lack a lot of that character development, but what really killed them for me was that nobody sticks to their ideals. Everyone is constantly antagonistic and treacherous towards one another. People just give up on their dreams. They give up on what they believe is the right thing to do. They are so easily convinced to betray each other, and it just wore me down. I stopped believing that even people like Kunigaru were going to do the right thing at the right time, And so basically I lost my faith in a lot of the characters because they just wouldn't stick to anything. People just did unnecessary dumb things to prove that they had the noble spirit. And that's okay, one of the things that I really did like about this book is there's a lot of discussion and a lot of portrayal of characters who defy their birth to behave in different ways. The expectation in this society is that the noble-born people have the noble spirits. They do the grand things and espouse the ideals of society, and that the peasant-born people just are never going to reach that level. But then you have people like Mata Zindu, who is noble-born, but he has a lot of flaws. He is basically this great warrior, but he lacks really important key things like compassion and kindness. He is too cruel. And then you have people like Kunigaru, who is peasant-born, but is set up to be more of our hero because he is trying to do the right thing for everybody in Dara. He does have that compassion. He does have this sense of goodness and fairness towards the people who are helpless in the face of this ongoing war that just kills everybody. And I really enjoyed how much the characters talk about how basically your inner nature and your strength of character isn't defined by your blood. You can become more than what society expects from you, and you can also really disappoint people's expectations of you. Just because you're born a noble doesn't mean you behave like one. Just because you're born as a peasant doesn't mean that you will never become noble of spirit. I was really disappointed in the lack of female characters, and then how the female characters who are in the story are portrayed. They're just wives, they're just pregnant most of the time, they're mostly sidelined a lot of the time, and the one kick-ass woman who's like a military general, yeah, I've got issues. But it's not all bad. I do think it's worth reading if you were interested in it, but it was not as fantastic as I wanted it to be. That is what I finished this past week. I'm in the middle of starting a bunch of books. On audio, I'm listening to Stone Mattress by Margaret Atwood. This is a collection of 9 stories that came out last year, I believe, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I've only listened to one story, which was Alphenland, and that was really good. That defied my expectations a lot. On my Kindle, I'm reading 2 books. I'm reading The Language of Power by Rosemary Kirstein, the 4th book in the Steerswoman series, and I'm reading Hyperion by Dan Simmons, which, wow, that book has an amazing beginning. I am hooked. I'm also trying to read Palimpsest by Catherynne Valente. This is the first adult novel I've read by her, and I think it's the one that has the sexually transmitted dream city. I really want to finish this coming week. And that is it. That's what I read this past week. That is what I'm currently reading. I'm going to go off and try to finish cleaning my house and getting ready for this coming week. And I will talk to you guys again in my next video. Bye.